Have you ever wondered what happened in the moments after the greatest act of love the world has ever known? Tonight, we step through a threshold into a story that doesn't end at the cross, but begins in the shadow of it. In the quiet hours of that fateful night, Jerusalem held its breath. A strange wind drifted down from the Mount of Olives, carrying a scent of premature death through ancient olive trees. The stars trembled overhead. The moon took on a blood-red hue as though stained by what was unfolding below. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, beneath centuries-old branches, he knelt, the one who spoke worlds into existence, sweating drops of blood. This was not a mere metaphor, but a very real condition known as hematidrosis, a rare occurrence when the soul bears such weight it erupts in physical torment. Meanwhile, unseen by human eyes, the heavenly realm stirred. Archangel Michael unsheathed his flaming sword, begging for intervention. Gabriel hid his face, unable to bear what was happening on earth, and the guardians of Jerusalem wept bitter tears. For the universe remembers. Divine justice does not rest. We are about to walk through a narrative seldom told. Not only the cross, the sacrifice, the resurrection, but the lives that intertwine with that ultimate act of redemption. The men who lifted prayer sacks of betrayal. The hands that tore sacred garments. The ones who thought they could wash away guilt with simple words, even as their souls cried out for something far more profound. From the high priest seated in judgment under lamplight, to the soldier who thrust a spear into his side, each had an ending. None was peaceful. As we begin this journey, keep this question with you. What happened after the innocent blood touched the earth of Jerusalem? And so our story moves beyond Calvary, into the stillness that follows thunder, into the night when the earth itself reacted, into the lives changed forever. Let us turn the page and walk into the shadows of what comes next. The story continues, the aftermath of the cross. When the sky darkened that day, it wasn't just the sun hiding its face. It was creation itself trembling under the weight of what had just happened. The veil in the temple tore from top to bottom. The ground shook violently. Rocks split open. Graves cracked and whispered the impossible. He is gone. But heaven knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of a reckoning that would echo through every life that touched the blood of the Son of God. One, Judas, the price of betrayal. Let's begin with the man whose name would forever be whispered with sorrow. Judas Iscariot. He was not born a monster. He once walked beside light itself. He heard the parables, saw the blind receive sight, and even felt the touch of divine mercy. But temptation doesn't always roar, it whispers. For 30 pieces of silver, the cost of a slave, Judas betrayed his friend. But as soon as the silver clattered across the temple floor, the truth struck him harder than any whip could. He ran through the alleys of Jerusalem, haunted by the echo of his own kiss. The very priests who had used him now looked at him with disdain. "What is that to us?" they said. "See to it yourself." And so he did. In a lonely field outside the city walls, the weight of guilt became too heavy to bear. The rope tightened, the branch groaned, and silence fell. But Scripture adds a strange detail. His body burst open. The field was later called a Keldama, the field of blood. Perhaps the earth itself refused to hide the shame. Yet even here, in the darkest act of despair, we see a tragic reflection of humanity, a man who could not believe that grace was still possible. 2, Caiaphas, the high priest who tore his own sanctity. Inside the marble chambers of the high priest, Caiaphas sat surrounded by the symbols of holiness, the lampstands, the incense, the sacred scrolls. He had once worn the breastplate of 12 stones, representing all Israel before God. But the night he condemned the Messiah, he tore his own priestly robes in anger, a gesture that by law disqualified him from his office. He did not know it yet, but when he ripped that garment, he symbolically tore the covenant of the old priesthood. In the months that followed, strange rumors spread through Jerusalem. The temple doors swung open by themselves at night. The western lamp, the one that symbolized God's presence, refused to stay lit. Caiaphas grew restless. His prayers turned hollow. His voice, once thunderous in courts, trembled when he spoke. And as years passed, his power crumbled. He lost his position, his influence, and finally his mind. Some say he was seen wandering near the valley of Hinnom, muttering to himself, "It was better that one man should die for the people. The irony is chilling. In trying to save a nation, he condemned his own soul. 3. Annas, the shadow behind the trial. Behind Caiaphas stood another, Annas, his father-in-law, the elder statesman of the temple. He had once been the most powerful man in Jerusalem, ruling through 5 of his sons and through Caiaphas himself. When Jesus was brought to him first on that dark night, Annas questioned him not to seek truth, but to maintain control. Yet after that night, control began to slip through his fingers like dust. Years later, during a violent uprising, Annas was dragged out of his home by the very zealots he once manipulated. He died in the same temple courts where he had judged the Son of God. The historian Josephus would later record his name among the fallen. How strange the justice of heaven, that the place of his judgment became the place of his death. For Pilate, the governor who could not wash his hands clean. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, had faced rebellion, petitions, and bloodshed before, but none like this. He thought himself pragmatic. What is truth? He asked with cynical smile. Yet even his Roman heart felt the tremor of something sacred in that prisoner's silence. When he stood before the crowd and washed his hands, the water trickled down and turned crimson in his mind. He told himself it was over. He had done what politics demanded, but peace never returned. Back in Caesarea, Pilate awoke each night to the same vision. The Nazarene's eyes, calm, forgiving, unbreakable. He washed his hands until they bled. He wrote reports that no one read. Eventually, Rome recalled him in disgrace. He was accused of cruelty, stripped of rank, and left to wander the outskirts of the empire. The man who had once commanded armies could no longer command his own thoughts. And one winter morning, they found him near a stream, his body cold, his hands still wet. History tells us he took his own life. The legend says the river refused to still after that day, as if the earth remembered the governor who tried to wash away guilt with water. 5. Longinus, the soldier who found grace. But not every story ended in despair. Among those who witnessed the crucifixion was a Roman centurion named Longinus. He had been blind in one eye from years of battle. When he thrust his spear into Jesus' side, blood and water poured out, splashing onto his face, and in that instant his sight returned. The healing of his eye was only the beginning. His soul awakened. The man who had driven a spear into the Son of God fell to his knees and whispered, "Truly, this was the Son of God." He left the army soon after and began to preach the story of what he had seen. He was later executed for his faith, but not before converting many. The same hands that had taken life now gave testimony to eternal life. This, too, is divine irony. The instrument of death became a vessel of mercy. 6. Herod Antipas, the king who laughed. And then there was Herod, the ruler who once mocked the Savior. When Jesus stood before him in silence, Herod treated him as entertainment, hoping for a miracle like a circus trick. But God does not perform for proud. Afterward, Herod's fortunes turned. He was exiled by Caesar to a distant land. His palace crumbled, his riches vanished, and his mind became a labyrinth of ghosts. Each night, he saw the faces of John the Baptist and Jesus, both men he had mocked, both eyes that saw through him. The laughter that once filled his halls became screams echoing in the dark. He died in obscurity, but his name remains, a cautionary tale of power without humility. 7. The silent witnesses, the earth, the sky, and the people. And yet, not only men bore witness to these events. The earth shook at his death, and again, quietly, at his resurrection. The sky turned dark not out of coincidence, but as the creation itself refused to look upon the suffering of its creator. Even Roman records mention the darkness and the earthquake that followed the crucifixion. It was as if the very fabric of reality tore with the temple veil. In Jerusalem, whispers spread. Some said they had seen dead men walking, prophets long gone, appearing in the streets for a moment and then vanishing. Others spoke of the sound of rushing wind in the upper room weeks later, something that would change the course of history forever. 8. The power of memory. What we learn from these stories is not simply judgment, but truth, that divine justice has memory. Those who opposed love met the reflection of their own choices. Those who turned toward it found redemption, even in their final breath. Each person's ending became a mirror of how they had faced a man from Nazareth. Some were consumed by guilt. Some were transformed by grace. But none remained unchanged. And through it all, the message endured. No one escapes the truth of what they do with Jesus. 9. The thread of grace. Even in these dark retellings, one thread shines brighter than any judgment. The thread of grace. Because while the world was still busy condemning, Jesus was forgiving. "Father, forgive them," he said, even as nails tore through his flesh. The men who nailed him, the crowd that jeered, the leaders who plotted, the soldiers who gambled for his robe, each stood under the rain of mercy that fell that day. And though some rejected it, others caught a drop and were changed forever. The same mercy still reaches through time, across continents, across generations, to us. To anyone willing to believe that even after betrayal, there can be forgiveness. 10. The echo that never fades. Centuries have passed, empires have fallen, languages have changed, but the echo of that Friday afternoon still moves through history. Every time we whisper his name, the world remembers. From the highest priests to the lowest thieves, every soul that encountered him found themselves revealed for who they truly were. And that is where our next chapter begins, not in death, but in the strange, unstoppable power of resurrection. Because the story of Jesus was never meant to end in sorrow. It was meant to rewrite sorrow itself. The conclusion, the light that never went out. When the stone was rolled away, it wasn't just an empty tomb they found. It was the beginning of something the world had never seen before. The silence of death was broken. The darkness that had swallowed the earth on Friday fled from the first rays of Sunday dawn. The cross, once a symbol of shame, now stood as the doorway to eternity. And in that moment, everything that had seemed finished was only just beginning. 1. The morning the earth remembered. Early that morning, the garden was still wrapped in mist. The air was heavy with the scent of myrrh and broken tears. Mary Magdalene came to the tomb, her heart shattered, her hands trembling. She came looking for a body. Instead, she met the voice that once calmed the storms. "Mary," he said, and at that sound, her name spoken by the risen Christ, every sorrow collapsed into joy. From that moment, history turned. Empires would rise and fall, but this one word, Mary, would echo through every generation, a whisper of personal grace. Because resurrection was not just a miracle to witness, it was a message meant for every broken soul. Death does not have the final word. 2. The ripple that reached the ends of the earth. News of that empty tomb spread like wildfire through Jerusalem. The same city that had condemned him now whispered of angels, open graves, and hope reborn. The disciples, once hiding in fear, suddenly walked into the streets with boldness. Peter, the man who had denied him 3 times, now preached in the very place where Jesus had been tried. "God raised him up," he declared, "and we are all witnesses." And the world began to change. The same Roman Empire that had crucified him would, centuries later, carve his name into its monuments. The same cross that once represented death now adorns the hearts of millions. The blood spilled on Calvary did not vanish. It became the ink that rewrote humanity's story. 3. What happened to the ones who believed? But let's go back to the people whose lives were forever changed. Longinus, the Roman soldier who found his sight at the cross, traveled north to proclaim what he had seen. They tried to silence him, but his voice carried farther than any sword could reach. Mary Magdalene dedicated her life to sharing the mercy she had experienced. Once called broken, she became one of the first heralds of the resurrection. Peter and John carried the message across nations. Thomas, once the doubter, journeyed all the way to India, telling those who had never heard of Jerusalem that love had conquered death. Each one of them died for the truth they proclaimed, not for power, not for wealth, but for the reality they had touched with their own hands. They didn't offend a myth. They carried a miracle for the unseen kingdom. Meanwhile, in places beyond sight, something else had changed. The gates of death had been shattered. The veil that separated heaven and earth was torn forever. No longer was God distant. The Spirit of God now moved among people, not behind temple curtains or stone walls, but within human hearts. That's why the story of Jesus could not stay buried in the past, because it was never meant to. It wasn't written to be a tragedy. It was written to awaken us. Every time someone forgives instead of retaliating, every time a heart broken by guilt dares to hope again, the resurrection continues. The tomb was empty, but the world was full of new life. 5. The justice that never sleeps. Still, the echo of those who had condemned him lingered in history. Pilate, Caiaphas, Annas, and Herod. Their names became lessons in power, pride, and regret. Each tried to control the narrative, to erase their involvement, to silence the memory of that Galilean teacher. But truth doesn't vanish when buried. It rises again, just like the one they tried to silence. Centuries later, historians will remember their titles but forget their words. Yet the name they sought to erase, Jesus, remains on every tongue, every prayer, every heart that seeks peace. The empire of Rome fell. The temple stones crumbled. But the kingdom of the risen Christ still stands. 6. The meaning for us. So what does this story mean for us, here now, thousands of years later? It means that no betrayal, no guilt, no darkness is beyond redemption. It means that the same mercy that reached Judas before the rope, that looked into Peter's eyes after denial, that healed the soldier's blindness, still reaches for us today. It means that the God who turned a cross into a crown can turn our failures into beginnings. Because grace didn't stop at Calvary. It began there. We often think of faith as something we climb toward, a mountain to conquer. But maybe it's more like a river, flowing downward, always finding the lowest place, always reaching those who think they've fallen too far. That's what Jesus did. He went to the lowest place, so no one would be left out of reach. 7. The invitation. If you listen closely, that same voice that spoke to Mary still speaks, not through thunder or fire, but through the quiet places, the pauses in our hearts when the world goes silent. It calls each of us by name. It says, I know your wounds, I know your fears, and I am not ashamed to call you mine. That is the heart of the gospel, not religion, not ritual, relationship, a creator reaching into creation, not to condemn, but to restore. And if you ever wonder whether he still sees you, remember, he saw Mary in her grief, Peter in his shame, Thomas in his doubt, and even the thief on the cross in his final breath. He still sees you now. 8. The flame that never dies. Through centuries of persecution, doubt, and darkness, the message of Jesus survived, not because of armies or politics, but because of love. Love is unkillable. It can be buried, mocked, denied, but it always rises again. The early believers carried that flame across oceans, deserts, and kingdoms. Some whispered it in catacombs. Others sang it on the way to their execution. And still today, that same light shines in churches, homes, and hearts across the world. Every prayer, every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness, they're all echoes of that first morning when the stone rolled away. 9. The end that is beginning. And so, the story comes full circle, from betrayal to redemption, from despair to resurrection, from darkness to light. The cross was not the end, it was the doorway. The tomb was not the silence of death. It was the beginning of the song of life. When Jesus rose, he didn't just prove that he was stronger than death. He proved that love always has the last word. And that word still speaks. To every listener. To every broken heart. To you. 10. A final reflection. If you remember one thing from this story, let it be this. You are not forgotten. The same eyes that wept over Jerusalem see you now. The same hands that carried the cross reach toward you still. And the same power that rolled away the stone can roll away anything that keeps you from hope. Because the story of Jesus was never meant to end in ancient Jerusalem. It continues. Every time a heart believes, every time light breaks through darkness, every time someone whispers, He is risen,